This is the key verse. What they do is say the way you identify an Israelite is by if they fulfill the curses described in Deuteronomy 28:68. But they use all of Deuteronomy 28. Let's go to Deuteronomy 28 real quick and take a look at it. I want to show you a few things out of this chapter as I have Deuteronomy 28 open before me. First, what's not here? What's not here is any indication this is a verse you're supposed to use to ever determine who the children of Israel are when you don't know who they are anymore. That's not in here. Meaning the way that they use the verse is not evident from the verse or any part of the Bible itself. It's not for that. Secondly, the curse that you'll forget who you are, it's not in here. The very curse they say is the reality is not present in the list of curses given to Israel if she disobeys the covenant. That's important to understand. That deals with the presuppositional nature of the way they're using this verse, this chapter. Now let me show you a few things. Call your attention to a few things. Maybe circle them in your Bible. Verse 27, it literally says the boils of Egypt. That shows you it's talking about real Egypt, real place. It's important. Keep that in your back pocket. Maybe just underline Egypt in chapter 28, verse 27. Then you also have verse 36. The Lord will bring you and your king, whom you set over to you to a nation that neither you nor your fathers have known. They believe this is fulfilled in the transatlantic slave trade. Who is the king? Was there one king of all the peoples? On that, who's the king? What do they say to this? Some say, if they believe in reincarnation, which some do, King David and those kings of Israel were there reincarnated. Some say that. But that's not what it's saying. Some say, well, here's this king you didn't know about. But even if they do that, he's not the king of all these different ethnicities. But this is a king that's been set over Israel, isn't it? Who's the king? Some say, well, every curse doesn't have to be fulfilled every time. That means they're saying it wasn't fulfilled in the transatlantic slave trade. That's an admission on their part. Verse 46, they shall be a sign and a wonder against you and your offspring forever. If these are always a sign for the offspring forever, then how would you ever not know who you are? Verse 52, they shall besiege you in all your towns until your high and fortified walls in which you trusted come down throughout all your land. This happened in the Bible, didn't? Assyria, Babylon, right? Your land. This means Israel. Because of this problem, some Hebrew Israelites claim, this is not a joke, and it's becoming an increasing position I'm seeing more, Jerusalem is actually in West Africa somewhere. Because there's a problem with this verse, because you see it's your land. It's not from another place. They shall besiege you in all your towns throughout all your land. Siege warfare wasn't a part of what happened. This is not the transatlantic slave trade mode of operation. Siege warfare? That's not how it went down. It's not a description of that. You keep on reading, verse 55 says the same thing. Then you go all the way down to verse 57. It's still talking about siege warfare in your towns. Now let's go to verse 60. Again, Egypt, the diseases of Egypt. Talking about Egypt for real, isn't it? Then you look at verse 62. You shall be left few in number. If you've got a 12-tribe chart, you've got Black Americans, Jamaicans, all the Native Americans, including all of South America. The 12-tribe chart goes down to the tip of South America, plus anyone that's Hispanic, wherever they may be. That's not few in number. The 12-tribe chart destroys this idea of few in number because it's a lot of people. Problems. And you shall be plucked off the land that you are entering to take possession of it. Where was that land? Israel. That's not where people were plucked off from. Now, there's a response to that, but I'll skip that for now because we got to get to verse 68 before we get out of here. Verse 68. And the Lord will bring you back in ships to Egypt. So you're going back to somewhere you were before, and we've already seen it's really talking about Egypt. You can't go back to a place you've never been. So this is talking about the new world. That doesn't make sense because it's going back to a place. So they'll say Egypt doesn't mean Egypt there. Egypt actually means bondage. But we've seen from the context of the verse, it really means Egypt because you're going back to that place. This is an undoing of the Exodus. Back in ships to Egypt, a journey that I promised that you should never make again. They didn't make a journey to America. So what's the journey they're making again? Back to Egypt. And there you shall offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but there will be no buyer. This is the ESV rendering. You will be in such a poor, destitute state, you'll offer yourselves for sale. That's why part of the curse is no one will even buy your services. That makes sense, doesn't it? If you want to be an indentured servant, someone's saying, not even. What else do you have left? If this is saying you'll be sold into slavery, wouldn't you be glad if there's no buyer? How's that part of the curse? So they interpret it as you'll be sold into slavery because the KJV gives them some leeway in the grammar. But how's it a curse that no one will buy you? They say that means no one will free you from your bondage. But it's buy, sell. It's not redemption narrative. So you've got literal ships going to a non-literal Egypt in literal bondage with a non-literal rescue, basically. They make mincemeat of the verse. And that's one reason I recommended Eric Mason's chapter on Hebrew Israelism. He gets into this and even shows in regards to some of the Hebrew grammar, it's important. We don't have time to do it all here, but there's an important word there, makar, which is the word offer, because you have to contextualize this to translate it, because the words you shall offer yourselves for sale are not in the text. You have to see what does it mean by makar. And here's the thing. We have other places where that same word makar does mean to sell yourself. And that's what it's saying. But if they want to make it literal, it's happened. Because what they'll say is, when did Israel ever go back into Egypt? During the days of Jeremiah. How do you know? Go to the end of Jeremiah. It says, don't go back into Egypt like the rest of the Israelites. That means Israelites are going into Egypt. Number one. Number two, 3rd Maccabees. Not canonical, but there's some historical elements in it. When were the Israelites ever put into slavery in Egypt? 3rd Maccabees. This is circa 217 BC. Can I read 3rd Maccabees to you? For in such manner, with harshness and pitiless heart, were they sent away with one accord by the generals in the cities, that at their sight of their unusual sufferings, even some of their enemies with common pity before their eyes, remembering the uncertain issue of life, wept at their hapless departure. For there was carried away a multitude of old men, covered with their wealth of gray hairs, forcing to a swift journey, with feet bent and sluggish from old age, under the violence of their rough driving, which knew no shame. Describing what happened to the Jews under a certain Greek ruler, specifically a man named Ptolemy IV Philopator. 3rd Maccabees, chapter 4, verse 7. And as prisoners exposed to public gaze, they were dragged along with violence until they were embarked on board in ships. I'm adding the in ships. It doesn't say that, but I'm saying, understand, on board is saying they're in ships. Verse 8. And their consorts with ropes on their necks instead of garlands, in the flower of their youthful age, spent the remainder of the days of their marriage feast in dirges instead of mirth and youthful ease, seeing the grave already yawning at their feet. And they were brought on board, driven like wild beasts under the constraint of iron bonds. Some were fastened by the neck to the benches of the ships. Others had their feet secured in the strongest fetters. And further, they were shut off from the light by the thick planks above, that in entire darkness they might be treated as traitors throughout the whole voyage. But you may say, yeah, but what about Egypt? Verse 11. When they had been brought to the place called Shedia, and the voyage was completed as determined by the king, he ordered them to be imprisoned in the hippodrome that was before the city, a place of immense circuit and very suitable for making them a gazing stock to all who entered the city, and to those of the inhabitants who went into the country to sojourn, so they might neither communicate with his army, blah, blah, blah. Where's Shedia? It's a town of Lower Egypt near Alexandria. Verse 14, and he commanded that the whole race should be registered by name, not for the wearisome service of labor, which was briefly described before. So it's saying this is for a different purpose, but they just were in service. They were just laboring. Do you see that? But that they should be tortured with the torments to which he had sentenced them. Verse 17, but after the aforesaid space of time, the scribes reported to the king that they were no longer able to continue the registration of the Jews on account of the incalculable number. Although the greater number of them were still in the country, some still remaining in their homes and others on their journey, it was impossible for all the generals in Egypt. Now, the point is, you don't need a leapfrog to the transatlantic slave trade to try to fulfill Deuteronomy 28. It's happened in Jewish history. Now, these verses, we don't have time to get to. I wish we did. Those are verses they use in a brief response. These verses in the bottom are verses we could use in discussions with them, but we don't have time to get to those. So if we could go to the next slide, last slide.